What happens when Hollywood's most unpredictable actor meets Britain's sharpest talk show host and things go completely off the rails? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most explosive interviews in recent television history, where Mark Wahlberg's famous Boston temper collided head-on with Graham Norton's legendary wit in a way that left everyone speechless. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me about the most awkward TV moment you've ever witnessed. Because what you're about to hear will definitely top that list. The Graham Norton Show had always prided itself on creating a relaxed, party-like atmosphere where celebrities could let their guard down and have genuine fun. The iconic red couch had hosted everyone from A-list movie stars to pop icons, and Graham's infectious laughter usually put even the most nervous guests at ease. But on this particular evening, the usual warmth in the studio felt different, almost electric with tension that no one could quite put their finger on. Mark Wahlberg walked onto the set with his characteristic confident stride, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit that screamed expensive taste. His hair was slicked back, and he had that familiar intense look in his eyes that had made him famous in everything from action blockbusters to serious dramas. The audience erupted in applause as he made his way to the famous red couch, waving with a smile that seemed genuine enough, though there was something slightly forced about it that keen observers might have noticed. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incredibly talented Mark Wahlberg. Graham announced with his usual enthusiasm, his Irish accent adding that familiar charm that made millions of viewers tune in week after week. The host was dressed in one of his signature colorful blazers, this one a deep burgundy that caught the studio lights perfectly. His smile was as wide as ever, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested he had some particularly interesting questions prepared for his guest. As Mark settled into the plush red cushions, Graham leaned forward with that conspiratorial air he was famous for, like he was about to share a delicious secret with both his guest and the audience. "Mark, it's absolutely wonderful to have you here. Now I have to ask, because our researchers have been having a field day with this, is it true that you once considered becoming a priest before you got into acting?" The question seemed innocent enough, the kind of lighthearted personal revelation that usually got guests laughing and sharing charming anecdotes about their past. But something in Mark's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. His jaw tightened, just slightly, and his eyes, which had been warm and engaging moments before, suddenly took on a harder edge. "Well, Graham, that's an interesting way to start things off," Mark replied, his Boston accent thick with what sounded like barely contained irritation. "Yeah, I thought about it when I was younger, but let's be honest here, we all think about a lot of things when we're kids that don't make sense when we grow up, right?" Graham, ever the professional, didn't miss the slight tension in Mark's voice, but he pressed on with his trademark gentle persistence. "Oh, but it's fascinating though, isn't it? The idea of Mark Wahlberg in robes, giving sermons instead of, well, some of your more colorful film roles. I mean, the contrast is quite striking when you think about it." "Colorful film roles," Mark repeated slowly, and there was definitely an edge to his voice now that even the studio audience was beginning to pick up on. The usual chatter and movement in the audience had quieted down, and people were leaning forward in their seats, sensing that something was brewing between the two men on stage. "What exactly are you trying to get at here, Graham?" The host's smile never wavered, but his eyebrows raised slightly in that perfectly innocent expression he had mastered over years of navigating tricky interview situations. "Oh, nothing at all, Mark. I'm just saying it's quite a journey from contemplating the priesthood to, say, playing a character who, well, let's just say uses some rather creative language. The range is impressive, really." Mark's hands, which had been resting casually on his knees, slowly clenched into fists. The movement was subtle, but the cameras caught it, and viewers at home would later replay those few seconds over and over, watching the exact moment when the evening began to take its dramatic turn. "Creative language," he said, his voice dropping to that low, controlled tone that anyone who had worked with him knew meant trouble was coming. "You mean because I've played some tough characters, you think that's who I am in real life?" Graham's experienced instincts told him he was walking into dangerous territory, but his natural curiosity and showman's instinct for compelling television kept him moving forward. "Not at all, Mark. I'm simply observing that your career has been quite diverse, from rapper to actor to producer, and now here you are, this successful Hollywood powerhouse. It's quite the transformation story, really." "Transformation story," Mark echoed, and now his voice was definitely getting louder, more aggressive. The casual, relaxed posture he had maintained since sitting down was completely gone now, replaced by the coiled tension of someone ready for a fight. "So what you're really saying is that you think I'm some kind of fake, right? Like I've somehow betrayed who I used to be or something." The studio had gone completely silent now. Even the crew members who usually moved around quietly during filming had stopped what they were doing to focus on the increasingly heated exchange happening on the famous red couch. Graham's professional smile was still in place, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes as he realized this was spiraling beyond his control much faster than he had anticipated. "Mark, I think there might be a misunderstanding here," Graham said, his voice taking on that soothing, diplomatic tone he used when things got uncomfortable. "I'm not suggesting anything negative at all. I'm actually quite impressed by your journey and the choices you've made. Perhaps we should move on to talking about your new film." But Mark was already shaking his head, his face flushed with anger that was becoming impossible to hide. No, you don't get to backtrack now. Graham, you brought this up, so let's talk about it. You want to know about transformation? You want to know about my past? Fine, but don't sit there and act like you're being supportive, when what you're really doing is judging me for where I came from. The audience was completely captivated now, watching what was clearly becoming one of the most uncomfortable interviews in the show's history. Graham Norton, who had handled drunk celebrities, crying guests, Graham could feel the sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. In all his years of hosting, he had never encountered a guest who seemed so determined to escalate a simple conversation into something much more serious. He tried one more diplomatic approach, leaning back slightly in his chair to create some physical space between himself and his increasingly agitated guest. "Mark, I genuinely apologize if my questions have come across the wrong way. That was never my intention. I have nothing but respect for your career and your accomplishments. Perhaps I could have phrased things better." Mark's laugh was harsh and bitter, cutting through the studio silence like a knife. "Oh, now you're apologizing. After you've already made your point. You know what, Graham, I've been doing interviews for over 20 years, and I can spot condescension from a mile away. You think because you've got this fancy show and this cute accent that you can sit there and psychoanalyze me like I'm some kind of case study." The host's famous composure was beginning to crack, and for the first time in the interview, a flash of genuine annoyance crossed his features. "Mark, I'm really not trying to analyze anyone. I ask questions. That's what I do. It's literally my job. And I've been doing it successfully for quite some time, actually." "Successfully," Mark repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right? By making your guests feel like they're being put under a microscope while you pretend it's all just friendly conversation. You want to know what I think? I think you've gotten so comfortable in this little bubble of yours that you've forgotten what it's like to actually work for something." Graham's eyebrows shot up, and the diplomatic mask he had been wearing finally began to slip. "Excuse me, what exactly are you implying about my work ethic?" Mark leaned forward, his intensity ratcheting up another notch. "I'm saying that sitting in a comfortable chair asking questions isn't exactly what I'd call hard work. Buddy, some of us had to fight for everything we've got. Some of us didn't have the luxury of just being charming and witty for a living." The studio audience was completely transfixed, watching what was rapidly becoming less of an interview and more of a personal attack between two men who clearly had very different views of success and authenticity. Graham's usual quick wit seemed to desert him momentarily as he processed what felt like a direct assault on his professionalism and character. "I beg your pardon," Graham said, his Irish accent becoming more pronounced as his emotions rose. "Are you seriously suggesting that what I do isn't real work? That hosting a television show watched by millions of people doesn't require skill or effort?" Mark's response was immediate and cutting. "I'm saying that there's a difference between entertainment and actually putting yourself on the line. When I make a movie, I'm responsible for helping create something that employs hundreds of people. When you ask a snarky question, you get to go home to your nice house and count your money while other people deal with the consequences." Graham's face was flushing now, his professional demeanor finally cracking under the sustained assault. "Snarky questions. Is that really what you think this is? Mark, I've interviewed everyone from heads of state to Nobel Prize winners, and somehow they've all managed to have a civilized conversation without resorting to personal attacks. Maybe because they were all playing the same game you were." Mark shot back, his voice rising enough that the studio microphones had to automatically adjust to prevent distortion. "Maybe they were all comfortable pretending that your little tea party atmosphere was actually meaningful, instead of just another way for rich people to pat each other on the back." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Graham's expression shifted from annoyed to genuinely offended. "Rich people patting each other on the back. That's really what you think this show is about? Mark, we raise money for charity. We celebrate artists and creators. We try to bring a little joy into people's lives. I'm sorry if that offends your sensibilities somehow." Mark was on his feet now, pacing behind the red couch like a caged animal, his expensive suit wrinkled from the tension in his body. "Joy. You want to talk about joy. You know what brings me joy? Working with directors who push me to be better, collaborating with actors who challenge me, creating something that matters. Not sitting here playing word games with someone who thinks he's smarter than everyone else in the room." Graham stood up as well, matching Mark's energy for the first time in the interview. "Word games? Mark, all I did was ask you about your background. If you can't handle a simple question about your past without turning it into a philosophical debate about the nature of work and authenticity, then maybe the problem isn't with my questions. There it is, Mark said, pointing an accusatory finger at Graham. There's the real you. The condescending, self-righteous guy who thinks he's got everyone figured out. You know what your problem is, Graham? You've been in this business so long that you've forgotten what it's like to actually care about something. The host's laugh was sharp and defensive. I've forgotten what it's like to care. Mark, I care about this show. I care about my guests. I care about giving people a good time. Just because I don't approach every conversation like it's a life or death struggle doesn't mean I don't care. A good time, Mark repeated mockingly. Right, because that's what really matters, isn't it? Making sure everyone has a good time, while you avoid asking any questions that might actually mean something. God forbid we have a real conversation about real things. Graham's composure was completely gone now, replaced by a righteous anger that his viewers had never seen before. Real things. Mark, what exactly do you think I should be asking you? Do you want me to grill you about your criminal record? Do you want me to bring up every mistake you've ever made? Because I can do that if you think it would make for better television. The mention of his criminal record was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Mark's face went white with rage, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Don't you dare, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare bring that up like it's some kind of gotcha moment. I've owned up to my mistakes. I've paid for them, and I've spent my entire adult life trying to be better than I was. Graham realized he had crossed a line, but he was too angry now to back down completely. I'm not trying to use anything against you, Mark. I'm simply pointing out that everyone has things in their past they'd rather not discuss. The difference is, most people don't attack the interviewer when the questions get slightly uncomfortable. Mark took a step closer to Graham, and several crew members visibly tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. Slightly uncomfortable. You think that's what this is? You sat there making smug little comments about my career choices, acting like you're some kind of arbiter of authenticity, and now you... The studio felt like a powder keg about to explode. Graham's usual composure had been completely shattered, and he found himself in the unprecedented position of genuinely disliking a guest while still being on live television. His hands were shaking slightly with adrenaline as he stared at Mark, who was now close enough that Graham could see the fury burning in his eyes. You know what, Mark, Graham said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I think I've figured out what your real problem is. You're so insecure about where you came from and so desperate to prove that you're legitimate, that you can't handle even the gentlest examination of your journey. That's not my fault, that's yours. Mark's reaction was immediate and volcanic. Insecure. You think I'm insecure? Let me tell you something about insecurity, Graham. Insecurity is hiding behind clever jokes and safe questions because you're too scared to have a real conversation. Insecurity is building a career on making other people feel comfortable because you can't handle any actual conflict or controversy. Graham's laugh was bitter and sharp, says the man who's currently having a complete meltdown because I asked him about considering the priesthood. Mark, do you even hear yourself right now? You're proving every point I never even tried to make. Meltdown. Mark's voice rose to a near shout. This isn't a meltdown. This is me finally calling out the fake, sanitized, meaningless garbage that passes for entertainment these days. You want to know what's wrong with this industry? It's people like you who think that being polite and inoffensive is the same thing as being worthwhile. The host took a step back, but his eyes blazed with indignation. Fake, meaningless. Mark, this show has been running successfully for years because people enjoy it. We don't need to manufacture drama or create conflict to be relevant. Some of us can actually entertain people without resorting to manufactured outrage. Manufactured outrage. Mark repeated incredulously. You think this is manufactured? You think I'm putting on some kind of act for your cameras? This is me being real, Graham. This is what it looks like when someone actually cares enough to get angry instead of just smiling and nodding and pretending everything is wonderful. Graham's voice was rising now too, his Irish accent becoming thicker with emotion. Oh, so now you're the only authentic person in the room. Everyone else is just pretending, but Mark Wahlberg is keeping it real. Give me a break. You're not being authentic, you're being a bully. The word bully hit Mark like a physical blow. His face went from red with anger to white with shock, and for a moment, the studio was completely silent except for the hum of the cameras and lighting equipment. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. What did you just call me? Graham realized he might have gone too far, but he was too caught up in his own anger to back down now. I called you a bully, Mark, because that's what this is. You came on my show, you escalated a simple conversation into a personal attack. And now you're trying to intimidate me because I won't just roll over and take it. Mark's hands were trembling with rage, and several crew members had moved closer, clearly concerned about the possibility of physical violence. You have no idea what you're talking about, he said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow more menacing than his earlier shouting. You sit in your little bubble, asking your little questions, thinking you understand people's lives, but you don't know anything about anything. I know enough to recognize someone who can't handle being challenged. Graham shot back, his own voice shaking with adrenaline. I know enough to see that underneath all that tough guy posturing, you're just scared that people might see through the image you've worked so hard to create. That was the final straw. Mark's face went completely blank, the kind of expression that anyone who had worked with him in high-stress situations would have recognized as the calm before the storm. He stared at Graham for a long moment, then slowly looked around the studio, taking in the cameras, the crew, the audience, all watching him with a mixture of fascination and horror. You know what, Graham? Mark said, his voice now eerily calm. You're right about one thing. I am scared. I'm scared that this industry is full of people like you who think that surface-level charm is a substitute for substance. I'm scared that we've created a world where being polite is more important than being honest. He began walking toward the edge of the set, his movements deliberate and controlled. But mostly, I'm scared that I just wasted an hour of my life, trying to have a conversation with someone who's so far up his own ass that he can't even see. How empty and pointless this whole thing is. Graham watched in disbelief as Mark continued walking. Mark, where are you going? We're not finished here. Mark paused at the edge of the set and turned back one final time, his expression a mixture of disgust and pity. Oh, we're finished. Graham, we were finished the moment you decided that being clever was more important than being decent. Enjoy your show. The studio erupted in chaos as Mark Wahlberg walked off the set of the Graham Norton show, leaving behind a host who stood speechless in the middle of his own stage, staring at the spot where his guest had been just moments before. The audience didn't know whether to applaud, gasp, or sit in stunned silence, so they did all three in a confused cacophony that perfectly captured the surreal nature of what they had just witnessed. Graham looked directly into the main camera, his face a mixture of shock, anger, and professional bewilderment. For the first time in his career, he seemed genuinely at a loss for words. The charming, quick-witted host, who could handle any situation, had been completely blindsided by a guest who refused to play by the unspoken rules of celebrity interviews. The cameras kept rolling as Graham struggled to regain his composure, the weight of what had just happened slowly sinking in. This wasn't just an uncomfortable interview or an awkward moment that could be edited out later. This was a complete breakdown of the carefully maintained illusion that made television interviews work. A raw and unfiltered glimpse into what happened when two very different worldviews collided without any possibility of compromise. The evening that was supposed to be a lighthearted chat about movies and career highlights had instead become something much more significant and troubling. A reminder that beneath the polished surface of celebrity culture, real emotions and genuine conflicts still existed, waiting to explode when the right circumstances brought them together. And there it is, one of the most shocking walk-offs in television history. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Did Mark Wahlberg go too far, or was Graham Norton out of line with his questioning? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make